Hey YouTube, Longboys Post 1975. Halloween is just around the corner, so I thought I'd ask a horror-based question. What is your favourite retro game based on a horror movie? Because we take horror games for granted these days, particularly Resident Evil, Silent Hill and horror, survival horror games. But back in the day, I can't recall, maybe it was just me, my childhood, my neck of the woods, but I can't really recall a massive amount of games based on horror movies. Now, that's not because they didn't license movies. I mean, Ocean was absolutely prolific with sort of movie titles on the Spectrum and the Commodore and the Amstrad, and Amiga and Atari ST. So being a little bit broader with that descriptive term there, when I was a kid. But there weren't many sort of horror games. Now, I guess you could say, well, it probably wasn't sort of appropriate to make a game licensed on a horror movie, but if you look back then, even as a kid, there were games based on 15 and 18 rated movies, so the fact that it was a horror movie probably didn't really factor into it. I mean, if you take the NES, there are a couple of absolute infamous stinkers. You got the Nightmare on Elm Street game, which is just tank balls, and you got the Friday the 13th game, which I've never played on the NES, but I have played on the ZX Spectrum. Classic example of I bought it based on the cover art. The game was terrible. It played very similarly to the NES version. It was absolutely terrible, but the cover art was an old school ice hockey mask with cuts and blood coming out of it in a pool of blood with a knife through one of the eye sockets. And as a kid, I just went, holy shit, that looks amazing, I'm buying you. But it was terrible. Random fact though, the B-side did come with a quiz where you had to try and answer 10 audio clips ripped from the movie to win a prize. And me and my brother would just play the clips over and over again because there was something exciting about experiencing sort of horror movie, even though it was just sort of audio or sound effects when you weren't really supposed to be watching or listening to stuff like that. But yeah, I can't really recall a massive amount of sort of games based on horror movies. So what's your favourite? Now mine is simple. Mine is Aliens, released by Electronic Dreams in 1986. Yes, I know you're going to say Aliens is a sci-fi movie, it's not a horror movie. Well, based on when I was a kid and I watched it, it scared the living piss out of me, and I've always considered it, can't talk, must be scared, a horror movie. I mean, technically Alien is the more sort of horror themed movie because even though it's an alien, it's kind of a haunted house or creature feature or monster of the week movie. The fact that it's an alien and not a werewolf or vampire is by the way, but Aliens to me is a horror movie. Now Aliens on the ZX Spectrum was a very, very unique game at the time, at least to me. I mean, I've talked to a few people about this game and they generally consider it in the same way I do, that there was nothing like it at the time. It's basic and crude as its graphics was, its interface was. I mean, it was kind of first person, but that might be too strong a descriptive term. There was sort of real-time strategy, in that you had every person from the movie and you could swap between characters, and depending on where each character was, you wouldn't necessarily be on the same screen. But yeah, it was basic, but it did bring something to the the ballpark that I never got at the time, which was it was generally very atmospheric. It made you nervous playing it. There was a real sense of fear. It may sound like I'm piling on a little bit thick, but no, it was. Basically, it followed the events of Aliens. All the Marines. Basically, you had to go through a series of screens. Now I say first person, but you could only navigate left to right. You would press forward and you would go through a door and go to the next screen. You had a crosshair that you could move around and fire. It was a one-shot sort of thing. It wasn't like, even though you had the guns from the movies, it wasn't like a pulse rifle effect. And when you went into these screens, sometimes they would be completely empty, and then you would go to the next screen. Sometimes there would be biogunk on the wall, which you would have to clear. Sometimes there would be an alien and you would go in and you would hear a noise, you would hear a sound effect, and you would know that you had to find this alien. And even though you could only move from left to right, you had to cycle as quickly as you could through this screen to find this alien, because otherwise he would kill you without you even seeing it, because there was a time limit. But if you did see him, he'd be moving from left to right or right to left, and when he saw you, he'd just come straight at you. And it was to drill him, to get the crosshair on this bad boy and blow his brains out. It made you nervous. There was a sense of consequence, I should say. I mean, I know I sound like I'm piling on for a ZX Spectrum game, but it is a truly unique gaming experience that did leave a lasting impression on me. I would do a playthrough on my Wii, but I can't get it to work. Now, there was a massive ton of screens, and navigating them I always found really difficult, because you got a map in the case, but it was a top-down map, which essentially was useless because you would progress in a forward direction. And it wasn't until Sinclair User Magazine released the map but numbered all the screens that I could actually progress through the game. Now, even though you had a massive amount, everyone from the movie to cycle through, you know, so essentially lives, and each person had their own amount of ammo, and as I said, they could be left on different screens and stuff and whatnot. More often than not, they dropped like flies, much like the movie, and I never really progressed more than halfway through the game, which is a shame because I would love to see what the ending of the game was like, if it had one, because quite a lot of games on the Spectrum back then were broken and never had endings because they knew that you would never get there, or they would make it rigged so you couldn't get there. But yeah, I would love, if anyone's beaten it, please leave a comment down below and tell me what the end of the game is like. But my favourite horror movie, or my favourite retro game based on a horror movie, is Aliens. To this day, I have very fond memories of it because, quite simply, I never played a game like it at the time that actually kind of, you know, affected you. It raised your pulse, it made you nervous, you felt there was a consequence if you fucked up. So yeah, my favourite video game based on a horror movie, my favourite retro video game I should say based on a horror movie, is Aliens by Electronic Dreams, released in 1986. What's yours? I would really like to know, and why do you like it? Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you.